mummification is a topic that I am pretty interested in. I don't know if you've seen the movie The Mummy before, but it is one of my favorites. Going on to the definition of mummy: a body of a human being or animal that has been ceremonially preserved by removal of the show what someone looked like 3,000 years ago. Now, moving on to when. We mentioned 3,000 years ago, but exactly 2600 BC, which is during the 4th and 5th dynasty, the Egyptians began to mummify their dead intentionally. The practice of mummification continued and developed into something called the Roman period, that is from 30 BC to 364 AD. Can you guess how long this period was? Well, it is actually 2,000 years. Yes, so mummification developed for a good thousands of years. Now, who were likely to be mummified and become mummies? After the death of Egyptians, firstly, this group were usually mummified and buried in elaborate tombs. And if you guessed it right, congrats, it is the group of pharaohs, which were basically the kings. Next, there were those who received similar treatment, and those were the nobility and also the officials. So nobility and officials right below pharaohs. And lastly, very rarely but still common enough to be mentioned, were the commoners. Now, why was it? Because this process was a very expensive one and was beyond the means of many. One thing to note is that animals were also mummified. These were mostly for religious reasons, for the sacred bulls from the early dynasties. Going on to cats, birds, and even crocodiles who had religious significances. The Egyptians preserved the body because they believed it was the home for the soul of the spirit. So firstly, there were 3 spirits: the Ka, which was called the double. It was the double of the person, and the Ka would remain in the tomb and thus needed the offerings and objects there. Next, the Ba, which is also called the soul, was a spirit that was free to fly out of the tomb and also return to it when it pleased. Lastly was the Ak, which was translated as spirit. Now the Ak had to travel through the underworld to the final judgment and also the entrance to the afterlife. To the Egyptians, all 3 of these spirits were essential. was then rinsed so that any residues would be gone. Secondly, the embalmers made an incision along the flank. Now, a sharp blade that was fashioned from an Ethiopian stone was used by the Egyptian. You can see that this is a side view of a person. If that's the neck, and the flank would be right beneath the shoulder socket on the side. Now, that incision would allow the Egyptians to remove contents of the abdomen and basically the organs inside the abdomen and chest. The organs were put into special boxes or jars to be preserved separately. These were buried with the mummy later onwards. The Egyptians left only the heart in place, believing it to be the center of a person's being and intelligence. Thirdly, the embalmers removed. They removed moisture from the body. They did this by covering the body with a type of salt called the natron, which has great drying properties. And they also placed additional natron packets inside the body. When the body had dried out completely, they removed the packets and lightly washed the salt off the body. The result was a very dried out but recognizable human form. They did this because, as we know, bacteria loves moisture, and to make the mummy seem even more lifelike, the sunken areas of the body were filled with linen and other materials, and even false eyes were added. Lastly, wrap it up. The wrapping began where each mummy needed hundreds of yards of linen. They were carefully wrapped, and the priest even wrapped each finger and toe separately before wrapping the entire hand or foot. A lot of times, amulets were placed among the wrappings, and prayers and magical words as well. And with the mummy complete, we move on to the funeral. As part of the funeral, priests performed special religious rites at the tomb's entrance. The most important part of the ceremony was called the opening of the mouth. This was where a priest touched various parts of the mummy to allow it to speak and eat. By touching the mouth, the dead person could now do those things and was ready for his journey to the afterlife. After being placed in the coffin, the burial chamber and the entrance were sealed up. This is our final product, guys. The definition: when